Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to this live analysis of the IIM Rohtak IPMAT exam 2020. Right? Let's first understand about the exam, the user interface, the test structure and everything before we get into the section-wise analysis of the exam. So today was basically day one of the IPMAT exam 2020 for IIM Rohtak. The test was conducted today between 3:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. for candidates of general category, SC, ST and OBC category students. The exam would be conducted in the same window tomorrow for category of persons with disability, right? The basic requirement that the college had informed to the students for taking up the exam was that students needed a laptop with minimum internet bandwidth requirement of 512 kbps. Also, they had mentioned that smartphones also could be used in case of an emergency, right? The test was not conducted using a particular application or a software. It was conducted through a Google form. The link for the two sections of the test was provided to the students over an email, which was sent to them on 18 July. That was Saturday. Students had to refresh the page at the exam start time to begin the exam, right? Before we get into the detailed analysis, let's understand about the exam pattern that was followed by the test today. So there were two sections in the exam. The first section was the multiple choice question section, wherein there were 60 questions from the areas of quantitative ability, logical reasoning, and verbal ability. So there were 20 questions each from quantitative ability, logical reasoning, and verbal ability. Right? The order was there were first 20 questions were on quantitative ability, 20 questions next were on verbal ability, and then the next 20 questions were on logical reasoning. So the total time duration for this section was 45 minutes. The section started at 3:30 p.m. and went on till 4:15 p.m. The number of questions were 60 and the marking scheme over here was +4 for correct answer, right? So the total number, the maximum marks for this section was 240. Thereafter, there was a break of 15 minutes that was provided to the students from 4:15 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. And thereafter which students had to take up the second section, which was the written ability test. For this particular section, students were provided with a separate Google form link. So this section comprised of two short essays on the topics which were provided to them. The maximum word limit for both the essays was 250 words approximately. Students had a time duration of 30 minutes to take up this particular section. And the maximum marks for each of the essays was 40 marks. So the total score for this particular section was 80, right? So understanding a little more about the exam, students, when they started with the section 1 at 3:30 p.m. through the Google form link that was provided to them, they had to enter this basic details before getting started. So they had to enter their full name, they had to enter the application ID, the registered email ID, and also their class 11th and 12th percentage marks. However, the FAQs which is uploaded on the IIM Rohtak website also mentions that if student did not have the percentage of class 11th or 12th, they could have left this particular field blank, right? As I said previously, the exam was conducted through a Google form. So the basic technical requirements for taking up the exam wasn't so much, but since Google form does not have any kind of auto submission facility, ensuring uniform time for all the students was a challenge. Some of the students reported to have faced a technical glitch at the start of section 1, wherein because of the heavy traffic, they probably started the section a little late. Say they missed out probably, they started late by 2 to 5 minutes. But because it was mentioned that students had to submit the section by themselves, the students still went ahead and submitted the section on or before 4:15 p.m. right? Section 1 comprised of 60 questions, as I mentioned earlier, 20 questions on quantitative ability, followed by 20 on verbal, and followed by 20 on logical reasoning. But there was no sectional time limit. There was a single page Google form wherein all the 60 questions were mentioned. Students had to scroll down to go through the different questions. Also, it has been mentioned on the website of IIM Rohtak that there would not be any sectional cutoff. The marking scheme as specified for section 1 is +4 for correct answer and a -1, -1 for a wrong answer. Also, the instructions of the section 1 specified that this was an open book, open notes, and open material exam. That meant that students could refer to any particular material while taking up the exam. But clearly, since the section had only 45 minutes to attempt 60 questions, it was more or less a speed-based exam. So students who would have spent time referring to a material would have lost out on precious time context of this particular section. Students were also allowed to do rough work during the exam using a pen and a paper. Also, applicants had to submit the exam on or before the given time in both the sections. Once students had completed section 1, they had a break of 15 minutes. At the start of section 2, again students had to enter all the mentioned details that they had put in at the beginning of section 1, except for the class 11th and 12th percentage marks. Right? Now, let us understand in detail about these sections, the section 1 and section 2. Section 1, as mentioned earlier, had comprised of QA, it comprised of verbal and comprised of reasoning. So QA, there were 20 questions. Overall, students found that some of the questions were easy, but some of the questions were also time consuming, right? And this was one section wherein students, most of the students attempted this section at last. Students attempted reasoning and verbal as their, initial two sections and happened to attempt quantitative ability as their last section. Looking at the breakup of the question types or topic-wise breakup over here in QA, there were around 2 to 3 questions from the topic of numbers. There was one question on square root and one question on cube root, which students have reported to be on the easier side. There were one or two questions from algebra, particularly one question from linear equation, which again students have reported to be on the easier side. Arithmetic was the dominant topic over here, where it comprised of around 7 to 8 questions. There were 2 questions on simple interest, compound interest, one question on profit and loss, one question on time, speed, distance, one on percentage, and around 2 to 3 questions on averages. So in this particular section, students have also reported that they found some typo errors, or they found that the data was inconsistent. So in particular, in an average question, there was question on the days of the week wherein there was no mention of Sunday in the data, but then the question was asked in context of Sunday. So that is one question wherein students found some inconsistency in the data. Right. Also, there was another question in this particular section wherein the data given was in terms of height or weight, either one of them, and the answer was asked in terms of, say, if the data was given in height, the answer asked was in terms of weight, right, or vice versa. So again, that was one question where students found some inconsistency. PNC, permutation and combination, was one dominant topic in this particular section. Around 4 to 5 questions have been reported on this particular topic. Also, probability, there were around 2 questions on probability. Overall, as I said, few of the questions were easy, but some of the questions were time consuming. 12 plus attempts over here, would have been a good score, a good attempt, and students should have ideally devoted around 15 minutes for this particular section. Okay, moving to the next section, which was that is the reasoning section. There were 20 questions on reasoning, comprising of analytical reasoning and verbal reasoning. There were 5 to 6 questions on arrangement, comprising of both linear and circular arrangement. The difficulty level has been reported to be on the moderate to difficult side. There were a couple of questions on series. in particular one question on missing number, that there was a series of numbers given. One number was missing, which the students had to identify. And similarly, there was a series given consisting of one incorrect number, which students had to identify. Both these questions have been reported on the easy side. There was one question on coding, which was related to number coding. So letters had been coded into numbers. This particular question also has been reported to be on the easy side. There was one question on dices, 2 to 3 questions on blood relations, one questions on directions, right? These questions on blood relations and directions were reported to be on the easy side, right? For verbal reasoning and the remaining part of the exam, I will hand over to Deepak sir.
Okay, thank you, Ankur sir. So as we noticed, as we're done with the reasoning section, right, particularly the verbal reasoning section had a fair amount of syllogisms. And right, all of those questions were basically statement and conclusion type, right? So now, all in all, if we talk about reasoning, right, it turns out to be easy or moderate, right? What would expect is an attempt of around 15 plus, right? Then moving on to verbal. So this is quite an interesting part, right? So what we had is there were 2 or 3 different question types that we encountered, right? So now we had the conventional vocabulary based questions in which had one word substitutions, like the students were given the meaning of given a meaning, and then from the options they had to identify the word to which the meaning corresponded. Then there were fill in the blanks based questions, right? There were a couple of questions on analogies, right? Now there were passages which hardly had 2 or 3 lines, or I would say maximum 4 lines or 4 sentences, right? And each of these passages had around 2 questions. All of them were direct, right? One of those passages also had a question on fill in the blanks, right? Then the interesting part starts over here, right? So there were sentence arrangement questions which were grouped in, which were asked in the format of match the following. So it was like you're given 2 columns, right? A part of the sentence is in column A, another part of the sentence is in column B, right? So you're supposed to match, suppose serial number 1 in column 1 in column A matches to serial number 4 in column B, right? So similarly, you had 4 different entries and you had to match such 4 entries. So this is something that would have taken time. This is something that would have taken time, right? Then talk, and hence we have classified it as moderate, right? Then we had questions based on grammar. There were around 3 questions, right? Which consisted of error detection, and also there was a question on identifying the correct or incorrect sentence. Right, but they were easy. Particularly the question on sugar was quite easy, right? Then now this is interesting. When we talk about grammar, there are certain questions based on conjunction. So what they had is you're given 4 sentences, right? You're given 4 sentences, and in the options you're given conjunctions, right? So you're supposed to connect. You're supposed to connect any 2 of the 4 sentences using a conjunction that was given in the option, right? So you're supposed to connect any 2 of the 4 given sentences using a conjunction that is given in the option. So a surprising factor for us would be the format in which they came up with the sentence arrangement and conjunction questions, right? So that is what pretty much made the verbal section. 6 questions of vocabulary, right? 2 questions on analogies, 3 to 4 questions, rather 3 to 4 short passages, rather those were 3 or 4 sentences long, which had 6 questions. Sentence arrangement in form of match the following, which had 1 question, 3 questions on grammar, and 2 questions based on conjunction, right? So overall, what I'd say is the verbal section was fairly easy if you don't end up giving time in sentence arrangement or certain conjunction based questions, right? And an ideal attempt for this section would have been around 15 questions, Now, coming to the section 2 of the paper, which was WAT, right? So WAT surprisingly was quite easy, right? There were 2 topics. Students had to write on both of the topics. There was not an option of choosing any one of them, right? Students had to write on both of the topics. The word limit was 250 words, and or it could be 1000 characters, right? So this is what confused a few of the students as well, right? That is, one of the students probably, rather a few of the students probably would have completed their 1000 characters but would not be able to complete their 250 words, and then this caused a little bit of problem. But then overall speaking, if you used correct spellings, if you used correct grammar, and you were quite successful in communicating the idea, right, then I think you would be through this section as well. Right? Now, coming to the overall analysis, as stated by Ankur sir, right? So what we recommend is in quant, you would have spent around 15 minutes per web. In quant, you would have spent around 15 minutes and attempted around 12 questions. For reasoning, you would have spent around 20 minutes because reasoning had questions on puzzles, right? This would have taken time and attempted around 15 questions, right? For verbal ability, 10 minutes would have been more than enough. We would have attempted around 15 questions, right? So now, when we talk about overall attempt, so an ideal attempt should be around 45 questions, and a good score in this case has to be 130 marks, right? So that is it from our side. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.